hundreds of thousands of people with him. But Buddhism continues, conversions continue, and I have spent a lot of time thinking about Ambedkar's Buddhism, wondering what elements he took from Indian culture, wondering how it can be seen as a totally Indian phenomenon. Ambedkar was interested in Buddhism from his youth on. He was given a life of the Buddha when he passed his matriculation, and that was it. I think that edition of the Buddhist life is still in print, as well as one by the famous scholar Kosambi. Buddhists came from all over to talk to him, including one from Italy. And curiously enough, that man's grandson has sought me out to say his grandfather came and talked to Ambedkar about converting to Buddhism, and I thought, oh, how interesting. Wherever Buddhism has gone, and it's spread widely in Asia, it's combined with the culture there. In Japan, Buddhism and Shinto are intertwined. In China, Tao and Tao are intertwined. In Tibet, it's the bone. Southeast Asia is ancestor reverence. When I was in Vietnam, every house had a little corner in which the ancestors were given reverence and love, and their merit increased. But in India, Ambedkar wanted to leave Hinduism. He wanted to ignore the gods. He wanted, of course, to get rid of the caste system. So what did he take? He took quite a bit, because he really was very, very immersed in Indian culture. And there's more to Indian culture than caste and gods. First of all, he took the Buddha himself. More than any other work, I think, it's centered on the Buddha himself, the life of the Buddha. Every page of the Buddhist Bible that Ambedkar wrote has a mudra, teaching mudra of the Buddha. Every page, every incidence is given not as philosophy, not as something totally out of it, but as something surrounded by the Buddha's life and his teaching. The Buddha appears on every page. So the Buddha himself is something that Ambedkar took from Indian culture and made lively and alive and vivid during his exposition of Buddhism. What else? He took Buddhist art. He was in love with the caves of Ellora and Ajanta. He visited them, and actually if you go to them today, and you really should go to the caves of Ajanta and Ellora, they are some of the most marvelous attributes, most marvelous findings in India that you will find. Go to Aurangabad, but don't be stopped just by the Aurangabad caves. Go out to Ajanta and Ellora and see what Buddhist art at its height looked like. And actually you will find a lot of the guards there are Buddhists chosen and choosing that life because they wanted to be close to the art of the Buddha. What did he else take from it? Well, believe it or not, he took a form of equality. India has a very interesting pattern of people from every kind of caste, every background, contributing. His father was the Kabir Patti, and Ambedkar himself was very fond of a Bhakti saint poet called Tukaram. He took a quote from Tukaram for the cover of his first newspaper, Muknayak, the voice of the voiceless. And he had a book which he dedicated to Ravidas, Sokamela, and Nandanar. These are untouchable saints from the Hindi area, the Marathi area, and the Tamil area. He knew about them, he knew them, he projected their importance. I don't know any Western culture that has quite so much creativity from the lowest of its social groups as India does. We did a book called Untouchable Saints, an Indian Phenomenon, and we found untouchable saints to be extremely important in a number of language areas. So I think Ambedkar took from India that sense that everybody, anybody can be creative, anybody can contribute to culture. certain internationalism in Indian culture. But Buddhism, I think, is extraordinarily open. The chief bhikkhu in Nagpur is from Japan. He's been there for years and is a very loved, very important figure. You will look throughout, well, the area I know best is Maharashtra, and you will find all kinds of foreign influences woven into the Indian culture. When I was there first, the Tibetans were trying to relate to the Maharashtrian Buddhists. That's kind of hard because they had no language in common, but they had molds for the Buddha image, and they would come to an area and get out the mold and get some clay and make a mold of the Buddha. The Dalai Lama has been very good about coming to events in Maharashtra. So there is some sense of what can I say, interwoven of life with the Tibetan Buddhists and the Maharashtrian Buddhists, even though it's extremely different sort of Buddhism. What else? Well, Maharashtra at least, and maybe some other places, had a great tradition of Pali, the language in which Theravada Buddhists wrote their texts. It was taught at some of the colleges, and Ambedkar made sure it was taught at every college he established. He himself tried to do a Pali dictionary, which I think is a very bold and very courageous thing for him to do in his old age. Pali is a gift of Maharashtrian Buddhism to the Buddhist movement of Ambedkar, and a gift given back. What else? Well, Buddhism in India stressed education. Nalanda was a great university for Buddhists from all over the world, and that has continued. Buddhists of all sorts have established hostels so students could come in from the countryside, go to a school, live somewhere because they had no relatives who had that much money in the place where the school was. And that has been a very great boon for education in areas where there are Buddhists in the Ambedkar movement. What should we call this Ambedkar Buddhism? Well, someone has thought, well, let's do it. Mahayana is the great vehicle. Hinayana, which they don't like, call it Theravada, is the lesser vehicle, and the new vehicle is Navayana. And this has caught on so that Navayana Buddhism is seen as a new kind of Buddhism, but one that very much within the tradition. I want one more word that's come into Ambedkar Buddhism, Navayana Buddhism, and that is Manuski, a word Ambedkar used a great deal, a word meaning of mankind, for mankind, human, humanity, humanness. And if you read the Buddha and his Dhamma, and you should, don't listen to me, go and read Ambedkar's writing, you will find it filled with incidents of Manuski. There's a story of the Bhikkhu Anand, who was faced by a woman who said, I've lost my child, I can't live. And he said, go all around town and find a home in which there has not been a loss. And the woman came back and said, I understand. I did not find a home in which there has not been a loss. I can live with this. Which reminds me, there's another factor. Ambedkar wanted a Sangha open to all, and of course the Buddhist Sangha was open to all. And he even tried to have a teaching institute for the Sangha, which did not come to fruition. So the idea of a priesthood, except that's the wrong word, since the bhikkhu is not a priest. The idea of religious leadership from all aspects, thoroughly trained, is an Indian idea that he put into his Navayana Buddhism. So how do we know what's accurate and what isn't? Well, we use the test from Ambedkar himself. If it's reasonable, if it's believable, if it does good for mankind, if it does not create hate, then it's something you can trust. So, Dhamma, Chakra, Pravartan, Deen, to everybody. Rejoice. Thank you. Bye-bye.